This week, Shavua Tov, everybody. Have a good week, a blessed week. This week should be Mashiach for sure. Should have a little bit of Jewish identity over here, a little bit of peace. Everyone should recognize the creator of the universe. And this is, I hope, adding something to that goal. So we're learning some of the ideas of what's the inside of the Torah, inside of the soul of the Torah, and how this is relevant to us, just like a soul, right? Everybody has a soul, and your soul is what gives you life. So on the one hand, the soul is the most esoteric, not understandable thing that could possibly be your soul. What is it? To the degree that there's even some people say there is no such thing as a soul. There is no such thing. You're just born with batteries, just like a robot or something like that. Because the soul is very deep. But on the other hand, the soul is the most, how do you say, obvious thing there is. We're alive. Here we are. We're alive. So that's the soul. So that's the idea of the soul of the Torah. Without the soul, without the soul of the Torah, so it's like a robot, like any other book in the library. But as soon as we see and we feel the soul of what the Torah is, and the source of the soul of the Torah, so then we take the whole thing in a different way. The Torah is here in order to put life and meaning and blessing in the world, right? To make the world a healthy place, and that the world will be a blessed place. Okay, so let's begin. This week's Torah portion is called Parshas Bo. In it, there are the last 3 plagues that God brought on the Egyptians and the preparation for going out of Egypt. Next week, we talk about actual going out of Egypt. There's the preparation for the Jewish people going out and leaving Egypt. Okay. So it says, Be'etzem hayom hazeh, on that very day, Yatzu went out, called Tzivaot Hashem, all of the armies of God, all the armies of God went out of Egypt. Went out of Egypt. Okay, this is talking about the 15th day of Nisan, the Memta. This is the day when all of the Jewish people are going out of Egypt. This is after all the plagues were finished, talking about they're going out of Egypt. Okay, Hine. So the Jewish people here are called something interesting. They're called the armies of God, or the hosts of God. Host is sort of a weird word. It's not really used that too much. A host is not like we say there's a guest and a host. This is talking about the myriads of creations are called Tzivaot. Tzvaot HaShamayim are called all the myriads of types of planets and comets and stars and galaxies. But that's called the Tzvaot of the heavens, Tzvaot HaShamayim. But here we're talking about Tzvaot Hashem. The word Tzava also means army. So it says all the armies of God, they went out from the land of Egypt. But it also means Tzivot Hashem, all the different types, because every Jew is different from every other Jew. Every human being is different from every other human being, but it's markedly so by the Jewish people. So it says, on that day, all the Jews got out of Egypt. Hine, Omer Azal, the rabbis say, one minute, let's make this bigger here. Let's make this bigger so that it is reader friendly. How do I do this? So it says why doesn't this still work? Oh, here it is. Got the wrong thing. There we go. Oh, so it says by Chana. Chana, who was Chana? Chana was the mother of the prophet Samuel, who was the first official prophet. Samuel. There were prophets before. Abraham had prophecy. Even Bilam got prophecy, but not. We're talking about prophecy for all of the Jewish people to tell them how to act better, how to improve themselves. So the first prophet essentially was Samuel, Shmuel the prophet, and he coronated King David, and before that he coronated Saul. Chana. Now, what was the story with Chana? Chana prayed to God. This is the Chana. We read the story about Chana on Rosh Hashanah. Chana didn't have any children, and she prayed that God should have a child. And she said, if I have a child, I'll dedicate him to God. I'll put him in the Holy Spirit. Sure enough, she got pregnant, and her rival wife, her husband was Elkanah. He had 2 wives, and she had a lot of children. Chana didn't have any children, and Chana prayed to God, and she gave birth to a son. And when he was 3 years old, so she took him to the Holy Temple. In that days, the Holy Temple wasn't a temple in those days. It was the tabernacle. It was in a place called Shiloh, and she took him to Eli. Eli was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and she said he's staying here, and so he stayed there. Okay, so she prayed to God, and she called God by the name, an unusual name. She called him by the name of Tzvaot. Hine, Omrazal, Ad Chana al Chana. It says, Miyom Shabora Kodesh Baruch Hu, since from the time that God created the world, Lo Haya Adam, there was no one who called God by the name of Tzvaot. Now, Tzvaot is one of the names of God. Tzvaot is a name of God. There's names of God that you're not allowed to erase. You're not supposed to erase any name of God, but there's names of God which you're not allowed to erase. That's why we write all the time G-D, and but there are some names that's the custom, more the custom. But the actual, there's names which are forbidden to erase, and one of them is Tzvaot. Tzvaot was one of them. This name of God was not used until Chana came. Until Chana came along. Right? How long was Chana? Chana was, how long was Chana? Chana was, let's see, 1,000 to 3,000, 3,000, like 3,700 years, something like 3,800 years after the world was created. That's where Chana came along. Chana came along, right? She was like 500 years after the temple, 450 years after the Jews got the Torah and the Jews got out of Egypt. So something like, 4,000 years afterwards, the world waited for 4,000 years until Chana came along. The Hainu, namely Shahaya, Patcha, she, Patcha Techila, she began, first of all, the Krota Kodesh Baruch Hu, to call the God by the name of Hashem Tzvaot. But usually you never see the word Tzvaot alone. That's not, I don't think there ever is. The name of it's always joined with the name Hashem Tzvaot. Some people even say Tzavakot. They don't say Tzvaot. Omer Kodesh Baruch Hu, God said, Atid ben Shalach, your son is going to liftoach, to begin Benavu in his prophecy, and then with his name, like it says, Vayomer Shmuel, that Shmuel said, Ko Amar Hashem Tzavaot. This is what the God of the Lord of hosts said. Pokadati means I have, and I visited, I'm taking notice of what King Saul is doing, and I don't like it. Pokadati. So Samuel prophesies with his name Tzvaot. The Nevi'im and the prophets after him, Navu b'Shem Zeh, also use this name. Ubafrada, especially Chagai, Zachariah, and Malachi. The Chagai, Zachariah, and Malachi, they were three prophets in the beginning of the Second Temple. And that's where official prophecy, although that was written down in the Torah, that's when it stopped. Right? There was prophecy still in Israel. To this very day, there's prophecy. But the official prophets, that ended in the beginning of the Second Temple. They were Chagai, Zachariah, and Malachi. They used this name more than any of them. The Kaimalan, we've learned that Tzvaot, that the name Tzvaot, Umena Shemot, this is one of the names, She'enu Nimchakim, but it's forbidden to erase. Hine, behold, B'techila, first of all, Yesh Lahaktim, let's proceed with the idea of what are these names of God? What does it mean that there's names of God, and what do we care they use this name, they use that name, that she was the first one to use this name and that name? Why is that so important? First of all, let's understand what is the idea of names of God. Gamma Mila's Shem, and also what's called the Shem HaMiyuchad, the special, unique name of God, which is Havaya. Havaya, they don't want to spell it out, doesn't want to spell it out. There's a spelled out Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. That's the name of God. That's the name of God, Yud, and then Hey, Vav, Hey. That's more indicative of the essence of God, Hey, Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, Hey, on all the other names. And afterwards, we will explain with God's help, in Hashem, in Shem Tzavaot. Okay, so let's understand what are these ideas of names especially what's the idea of the special name of God, where every time you make a blessing, you use this name of God, and we don't even say the name. We're not saying the name of God. We don't say Baruch Atah, that we're starting with you. We say Adonai, which you're also not supposed to say that either. But that's more, how do you say, close, effable than the ineffable name. It says we're not supposed to say the name Yud Kei. Okay. In the future, when Mashiach comes, it says then God will be revealed. The reason why we're not supposed to say these names is because it can't be stressed enough what we're talking about when we're talking about God. We're talking about our Creator. Our Creator. We're talking about real, true existence, right? And if you don't like it, if somebody uses your name, not nice. You hear somebody saying your name, right? That Joe, whatever it is, Joe Smith is really an idiot, right? So Joe Smith, oh, you feel really bad if that's your name. This is not Joe Smith. It's not talking about Joe Smith. You're talking about that guy with the carries a sword around all the time with the big hat. He says that's not Joe Smith. That's Joe Britt. Oh yes, you're right. Oh, then you feel better. If it's your name, you feel bad. A name applies to a person, not just to a person, but to the essence of a person. Sometimes if a person faints, you call his name and he can wake up. But he calls up. You call a person's name out, everybody turns around if that's the person's name. So the same thing is with the names of God. That refers to God. But God is not a person like anybody else, and God is not a creation like anything else. God's existence is infinitely more real than ours is. We are being created by God. So therefore, you're not supposed to use the names of God just to throw them around. In fact, you're not supposed to take the name of God in vain as a name of God, right? You're not supposed to name, this is the non-Jews also. You're not allowed to take the name. You're not supposed to say, oh, God did, or right? Use God's name to curse somebody, or not supposed to take that. Okay, here we go. I swear to God, right? You're not supposed to do that. Okay, Hine, behold. But this name Yud Kei Vav Kei, this is unusual. This really refers to the essence of God. And if it's forbidden just to throw the name of God, even in Spanish or whatever is French around, to throw it around, you're not supposed to throw the name of God around. And this name especially not. You're not supposed to say it at all. And like I say, even when we're making blessings, and it's written Yud and then Hey and then Vav Hey, we don't say Yud Hey Vav Hey. We say Aleph Daled Nun Yud Ado. So that's a special name of God. That shows on a special aspect of God. What is this? Let's see. And then after that, we're going to explain this name Tzvaot. This name of God, which is hosts. Behold, you do. It's known. It's known that the essence of Ein Sof, of God, is simple with the ultimate simplicity. And it's not relevant in God's essence, in a Torah, any sort of a name or title. Even to say that God is great, that God is infinite, that's like an insult. What? Because that's the, like, for instance, they say in the Torah, all the names that are called God in the Torah, those are just aspects of God. All those terms that are used by the Torah or the prophets, and also in the words of the rabbis in the Talmud, like that God is a chacham, wise, God is kind, God is merciful. True, God has those traits, but that is not God. Kihu Yisparech, because the essence of God, Kihu, because God Yisparech, blessed be He, Murumum v'niskav, umugdal, and separate Mikol Gedorim from all of these definitions. Sha'achachma, that this idea, I want to say that God is wise. Shehiyah Maila Rishona, this is the highest aspect of godliness we can call. Chachma means like the source of all life. This is nechshavet. This is considered to be asiya gashmis. This is like physical, a physical, the stone or something like that by God. What do we want to say? That God is the source of all being. God is the source of all life. That's a very low aspect of God. That He's the source of all being. That He's the source of all life. That's just how God creates. But what is God himself? What is God himself? That's why people say, well, if God creates it, who creates God? Right? Who creates God? The question is a good question. It's a good question. Who creates God? If God creates everything, so then who creates God? Who's God created? So of course you say, well, I mean, anything that would create God, so that's God. So who creates that? That's God. That's it. The idea of what the essence of God is not relevant to being created. Like we said before, God doesn't really exist. God creates all existence. Anything that we can put into the category of existing means that it has to be limited, defined in some way, right? It's like me saying, did you see my pen? What does your pen look like? Well, it's infinite. And what color it is? It's all colors. Everything. How big was it? Infinite size. Right? Well, when was this made? Oh, it was made before time. No time. It doesn't make. It's not a pen anymore. It's not a definition. So God creates the infinite. He's not infinite, but it's not to say that he's removed from the world. It's to say that God's reality is so infinitely real that we can't imagine what it is. We can't imagine what's God's reality. Like there's no possible way. Even the angels says the God is holy, holy, holy. Okay, but nevertheless, that's where we come from, and God is creating us. If so, you cannot call God, the essence of God, by any name or any any description. How much more so, how much more so we cannot call God by any sort of a description like it says, the lav mikol ilan midas kolol. Says that God is not of any of these attributes at all. But nevertheless, yesh metzius in Torah, there are these descriptions, Shabbat, that they come in the Tanakh, in the books of the Bible, and in the words of the rabbis. Like the rabbis say, the place where you find God's greatness, wherever you call God, that he's great, that he's infinite, this is really how God lowers himself down. That God has this ability to bring himself down, to be mitlabesh, to put himself in these 10 aspects of Atzilut. Atzilut, this is the highest level of reality that there could possibly be. Shein bechinas chesed and gevur, etc. Okay, so what are we talking? Let's get these things straight. We are people, right? We're human beings, and here we are. We're here. So we sort of figure, let's look at the world from our point of view.
What pages?
I know.
Oh,
He's talking about the.
that's who he's talking about.
Oh, so that's what he says about the.
Okay, Reb, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to mute somebody, and nothing personal here, nothing personal. Here we go. Okay. If you have any questions, write them like a chat, and we'll talk about it after the class. But my pleasure. If we were sitting in a classroom, it would be, better. But one person talks, nobody else can hear anything. Okay, what are we saying? Let's look at this thing properly. What's going on over here? We received the Torah, and we're looking at the world from our point of view. Our point of view, which that's the way that God wants it. We have to look at the world. But that's not the fact. That's not what it is. We are creations. We're creations. So the world only started by us, like when man was created or when we were created, right? So a person that's 50 years old, the world started for him 50 years ago. You can say, no, that's not so. The world started really with the Cro-Magnon man, or with Piltdown man, or with monkeys, or with tadpoles, or whatever it is. How 50 million years ago, 60 billion trillion years ago it started. But that's not so. The fact of the matter is, no matter how old you want to say the world is, it's a creation. And before the world was created, there was real reality. That was true reality. That was true infinite reality. That was the creator. There was a creator. And this is before time. Time itself is a creation. So let's look at the world from the creator's point of view. What's the creator's point of view? The Torah. The Torah is the creator's point of view of what the world is about. So, but we can't interpret the Torah how we want to. We have to interpret the Torah the way that God wants us to interpret the Torah. That's why he gave the rabbis. It says that the rabbis in the Talmud, they all have the power to raise the dead. They tell a story about the last of the Tanaim, Rabbeinu HaKodesh. He had the power to raise the dead. So these people were godly people, and they interpreted the Torah the way that God wanted to, right? But most of the Torah, we only see the tip of the iceberg, an inverted iceberg, want to call it. And really, the fact of the matter is, there's an author to the Torah, and that author, and the Torah is constant, and that author is even more constant. Right? The Torah issued from God. So this is a tremendous mystery. The Torah, that God has a will, that God has a desire, an inner desire, an outer desire, that he has the Torah. But nevertheless, we see a very interesting dichotomy. On one hand, God is above infinite, above, he creates the infinite. On the other hand, here we are. We're being created by God right now, and we're important to God. That's the point. The point of Judaism is that we are important to God. No, if you think that God is not existent, so then we're not important to anybody. We're just not important. But if you think that God is spiritual, so then we're a little bit more important. If you think that God is infinite, that he's creating the spiritual, then we're infinitely important. And everything we do is infinitely important. But somehow or other, we have to bridge this gap, at least to accept the fact that God is creating us, and that between the creator, the essence of God, and us, there's all these deep secrets and etc. And that's God's names. That's God's names. All these deep secrets and all these different aspects of, they're different aspects of how God reveals himself. But don't think that's God himself. That where you find all these aspects, that's just the lowness of God, how God brings himself down. Those are steps in order to create the world. So God also, he brought himself down to be put into chesed. This is called, then God's called big, great, infinite, kind. That's what it means, that God's greatness. If you say that God is infinite, this is God's humility. God is bringing himself down. That by means of God's humility, by means of God limiting himself, so to speak, that he brought himself down to be put into the aspect of kindness, as davka, then shayach, it's relevant to call God great. Which is not case, God's essence, moromum, this is totally above this, kaniskar le'el, like we said before. So, for instance, when we are praying, who do we pray to? We pray to God's essence. But on the other hand, we are trying to evoke from God God's kindness, and this kindness of God, this is God's kindness, it's an infinite kindness. So we can't understand where God's kindness comes from. We can't understand it. Right? We can't understand the kindness itself, but we just know that God blesses. That's why the whole essence of Judaism is faith. On one hand, but on the other hand, it's also understanding. You have to understand, because you have to understand as much as you can. The names of God, that's approaching understanding. That's sort of relevant to understanding God, that God has aspects. What's the point of all this? If you don't say that God has all these aspects, then that's what brings idolatry. What is idolatry? That you worship something else, you pray to something else that's closer to you, that's more comprehensible than God. You pray to a person, you pray to a spirit, you pray to a level, you pray to an aspect, you pray to a star, a statue, or something that you can put your hands on. That's called idolatry. But on the other hand, you say, well, listen, God is infinitely far away, so we have to have something to connect to God. So that's what we have to connect to God, the aspects of God, the names of God, God's kindness, God's power, even though that's not the essence of God, but it still is how God makes himself approachable to us. Those are the forces by which God creates the world and by which we connect to him and he connects to us. These names of God, they are the vessels of the 10 aspects of Atzilut. Kindness, right? We learned about the 10 Sfirot, right? Chesed and Gevurah, God's kindness, God's wisdom. These are what's called the vessels. Shemitlabesh b'hem or ein sof, there is put into them God's essence himself. So don't think that God's kindness is something separate from God. It's not. God's essence is inside of them, but tachlis yichud, ultimately unified. Al derech, like says the iu b'gramei uchad, that God and his bodies and his vessels are one. Hainu Shem Kael. That's the name Kael, this name of God, which is called Kael. This is the vessel of kindness. Shem Elokim, the name Elokim, this is the vessel for Gvura, power. Shem Adoni, the name Aleph Daled Nun Yud, this is God's essence of Malchut. Let's take, maybe we can take an example, a musician or a painter or someone. So they paint a picture or they make up a symphony. Or so we can't say that that painting is the person. We can't say that the symphony is that person. If the painting gets lost, nobody plays the symphony, that person still exists. That person has the music comes through him, that person. So, but that's just an aspect of the person. Nevertheless, a painting of Van Gogh or someone is worth 50, $100 million. And a painting that I make is worth maybe $2.50. What's the big difference between them? Because one has the artist inside of it more than the other one doesn't have such a big artist inside of it. So that's the same thing the Rebbe is trying to say. This world is really just like the painting or the vessels of God. And this world has spiritual swords. Those are also vessels. Even though the vessels of the upper worlds, they're sort of like the lights of this world. But nevertheless, it's all just vessels, just aspects, expressions of godliness. Shem Elokim, the name of Elokim, this is the vessel of, we did this. But Shem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, this essence name of God, which is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, this is the inside of all these names. Then all the other names of God, those are aspects of God. God's kindness, God's this. But the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, that's like the signature on all of them. That's like the essence of God. That shows that it comes from God. Right? These names, this is the godliness which is inside of them. This is like lights which are put inside of vessels. Kael, in the vessel, which is God's kindness. Shu Hashem, this is just the vessel of kindness. So, let's go back to our example, right? You have a symphony. The symphony is really beautiful. Who did that symphony? Rachmaninoff did the symphony, right? Let's say I don't know anything about music. Rachmaninoff did the symphony. This is beautiful. This is a different type of person. If you don't know anything about music, so you can't tell the difference between one and the other. But nevertheless, this is the composer is expressed through the music. The same thing, God is expressed through the world. If you don't know anything about godliness, so you're like a person who doesn't know anything about music, you can't appreciate the composer, the author, you don't know anything about the world. The Rebbe is trying to get us to understand a little bit about the author of the world that's inside of everything in the world. They want to call it the signature. The author here is represented by the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. That's the essence of God. That's the light which is inside. That's the value which is inside of everything in the world, even the components that are used to the forces that are used to make up the world. Those are the names of God. Those are the vessels used to make the God, the tools, if you want to call it. But God himself, so to speak, that's the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Okay, now one of these names is going to be Tzavaot. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Or this light which is drawn down from Ein Sof to be put into the world, Hu Bechinas Shem Yud-Kei. That's the name Yud-Kei. That's the light, not the vessels. But Cain also Bechinas Shem Elokim, and the name Elokim, which is Gevura, is inside of the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Which that name, right? I say Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, it's supposed to be Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey, but I don't want to say the name. Or this is the light of Ein Sof, light of God, which is put inside of the vessels, which the vessels are God's names. Now, again, why are we even talking about this? Because that's the job of the Jewish people. The job of the Jewish people is to reveal God in the world. That's the job. That's what the Jewish people are chosen for. We're chosen to bring blessing into the world. You can see after Abraham took Yitzchak to sacrifice him, and God said, don't do it. So he said, all the nations in the world will be blessed by you. That's what the Jewish people are chosen for, to make a blessing in the world. In other words, to reveal the Creator in the creation. Similarly, the Kol Hashemut and all the other names, that they are not erased. We said the name El, the name Adoni, all these names. They are just the vessels of godliness, how God expresses himself. But Shem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, but the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, This is the light which is inside. This is, so to speak, the godliness which is inside. Loki, and therefore Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, this joins with all of the other names. Like it says, Hashem Elokim Eretz Hashemayim. When God created the world, it says the name Yud Kei Vav Kei is joined with Elokim. Like it says, Havaya Tzavaot, also this name Tzavaot, that's the name we're going to talk about now. Because of this name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, this draws down, this is the name of God, which is the light of the infinite light of God, which is put into these names, Elokim, Tzavaot, which are, these are the vessels. So a person, let's say, can be very spiritual, and he can get into what's called the vessels of God and get into the occult and all these things, and leave the essence of God out of it, because the essence of God, that's the whole idea of the Torah. The Torah, and these names of God, that's the spiritual worlds, or the forces that come to make the spiritual worlds. Okay, so but if it's all unified together, that's the job of the Jewish people. The job of the Jewish people is to reveal not just the creator and the creation, but the reason for the creation. The reason that the creator wants to create the world. Because that's the fact. That's who we are. Shahu Mamutza, this is the connector between lights and vessels. Lokach, therefore, Hu Machaber, this joins lights together with vessels. So that's the job of the Jewish people. Something like they have, in their history books, they have the Piltdown man or something like. He discovered fire. He discovered fire. Before that, there was no fire. Then there was another one, the Neanderthal man. He discovered the wheel. There was no such thing as a wheel before they discovered. But after he discovered fire and wheel, then the whole world became much more better. I'd say much more practical. They could utilize and bring out things that were hidden before. So that's what we want to do. We just want to reveal principles of creation that were there. The principle of the wheel was there before, right? And the principle of fire was there before. Of course, we know that the fire was created by God. It said, but let's just say however we want to say it. As soon as fire appeared, then all of a sudden new things could be. You could work in the nighttime. You could work on you could cook food. You could change metal, make instruments. The same thing. There's principles of godliness in the world that the Jewish people are supposed to be here to reveal. Right? Jewish people, that's the job of the Jewish people. Could be that's why the Jewish people get so many, Nobel Prizes and things like that, because that's the nature of a Jew, is to reveal what's hidden, to be practical, to reveal the potential which is hidden inside of the world. There's a tremendous potential. Here, the Rebbe is more talking about what is the potential hidden inside of man. How we have the ability, by means of changing our attitude, our connection to God, to change the whole entire world. And we see that's the whole theme of the Torah. When Adam ate from the tree, the whole world went bad. When everybody sinned, so there was a flood. When everybody was good, then there was a holy temple. When it all depends on man. That's this mind when we're learning Bati Lagani. Okay, we'll stop here. That's the first paragraph. We're talking about the names of God. We're talking about the essence of God, which is in these names of God, and how we are trying to reveal them in the world and bring blessing and meaning into the world. What is this name, Tzavaot? We'll talk about that more, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's learn the Devar Malchut. Here we go. 1 minute. I want to also learn the Bati Lagani. 1 second. Let's see. We go. I have to navigate.